Welcome back to Global Spiritual Revolution Radio, a media group here in New York. You can call us in right now at 929-477-3997. Again, beloved, that is 929-477-3997. Now, if you live outside of the continental United States of America, you can call us in right now at 1-929-477-3997. Again, beloved, that's 1-929-477-3997. We are so very excited here tonight on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio and Media Group to have a man of God that I believe is one of the most powerful teachers that I have ever heard. He is a global forensic economist, world-renowned Mr. David HAWKINS, and I'm just so very honored, and so is my staff and production team here at Global Spiritual Revolution Radio and Media Group out of New York to have Mr. David HAWKINS back. Amen. David, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be back with us again on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio.
Thank you very much, Bishop, and it's a pleasure to be back with you. It seems a long time.
I know, it seems too long, and I am, again, from the very first time that you came on the broadcast, and I'm telling you, I've been getting a plethora of emails, positive emails, and a multiplicity of beautiful emails from our listeners stating that what you had stated some months back, they have never heard of this before. All right, we have world-renowned global forensic economist, the Honorable Mr. David HAWKINS. We're going to begin a brand new topic of discussion tonight, and I want to announce to our Global Spiritual Revolution partners that beginning tonight, Brother HAWKINS is going to be with us each and every month, at least once a month, because I really was blown away by his revelations of the deep state, the global Illuminati, including this company that we're going to be really getting into tonight, Serco. And so Mr. David HAWKINS is going to be with us each and every month, and especially to the African American community, not just here in the United States, but all peoples around the world of African descent have been really looking forward to this broadcast tonight. And we're going to be talking about the Serco connections to the assassinations of JFK, MLK, and including Hurricane Katrina. Again, the Serco connections of the assassinations of JFK, MLK, including Hurricane Katrina, and we're also going to be touching on Serco's connections with Malcolm X as well, and I've got some new information I want to share tonight, and the subsidizing of the American Civil Rights Movement from 1955 to 1968. All right, David, just kind of give us a background again, just in case some of our listeners were not tuned in to the TV portion of the broadcast some time ago. Give us some background information and material. Who is Serco? Who began Serco? And what is their connections concerning the assassinations of John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and the Katrina catastrophe there in New Orleans?
Well, thank you. That's a huge question, Bishop, and of course we have to delve back into the history books to find out the origin of this organization. And back in 1929, it was set up in the UK, United Kingdom, as a subsidiary of Radio Corporation of America. So its name back then was RCAGB, 1929, and it marshaled some very powerful technology in the run-up to World War II, which allowed it to operate as, in my allegation, a front for banking interests and intellectuals, if you will, in the United States and the United Kingdom, as a murder for hire and mass casualty provoker, if you will. So that sounds like a pretty horrific reach or pretty horrific ambition. But let me just remind your listeners, if they haven't heard it before, of David Rockefeller's statement, "The world is ready to move to a supranational government of world bankers and an intellectual elite." Now, I'm fully believing that you're intelligent and I'm intelligent, but I'm not sure that either of us particularly want to be associated with an intellectual elite, at least in the minds of David Rockefeller, because I think we both love humanity, and I think almost everyone I meet would love to know the truth behind some of these horrendous crime scenes, including the assassination of JFK and Martin Luther King, and these kind of events that seem to be extraordinarily well orchestrated and coordinated, including the alleged demolition of the levees in New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina, and most recently, for example, the shooting in Florida. So what I've developed, with that my background is with abledanger.org,
Yes.
and just to indicate to you, we, at least I and my colleagues at abledanger.org, we've set ourselves the job of cloud-centric crime scene investigation, period. Now, that doesn't mean to say that abledanger.org doesn't receive a lot of information. We actually have, I think, a pro bono international network of people who give us their insights and act as researchers. So we hoover up information. There's a lot of filtering required, as you can imagine, probably with your own organization, because everyone has a different position or a view of these kind of incidents, some based in prejudice in advance, and others on they've been listening to persuasive, charismatic individuals who tell them what happened. But I like to think of ourselves potentially as an international group of Sherlock Holmeses with good common sense, and we can solve any crime, anywhere, anytime. Over to you.
In this circle, again, and I believe you had touched on this last time when you were on the TV portion of the broadcast, that it started out by David Sarnoff, and I just found out not too long ago that members of the Sarnoff family are proxy owners of NBC, the National Broadcasting Corporation, which you and I will never see on the internet. But this RCA, take us, we go from this RCA monopoly company in 1929. When do they become Serco, and who are the principal players that made this happen?
Well, let me run back before RCA was formed to the beginning of the last century. So a man by the name of Marconi demonstrated the wireless telegraph system at a place called Toynbee Hall in London, actually in Whitechapel, right at the center of where the famous Whitechapel murders attributed to Jack the Ripper were. Now, Of course, there's a million red herrings here, but I've been doing a lot of research on the Jack the Ripper murders, and no one had heard of the name Jack the Ripper until someone sent a letter to a vigilante media operation signed in red ink that was supposed to be blood, and he said, basically, he signed off as Jack the Ripper. But our research indicates, actually, this might amuse you, well, I hope it amuses you and your listeners, I think it was actually Jane the Ripper, right? And Jane the Ripper came from Chicago, and she was the founder of the university settlement movement in the United States, and she had stayed at Toynbee Hall during the Whitechapel murders attributed to Jack the Ripper, and each of those murders, the so-called canonical murders, which involved disemboweling the poor victims, was a short walking distance for her and her friend, Ellen Starr, from Whitechapel. Now, that doesn't prove she was responsible, but it's very interesting if a suspect is in the vicinity of a crime scene, and the crime scene has some very intriguing characteristics, which include, and this is fast forward to Serco, at that time, communications that were operated by the police in the event of these kind of crimes went over the telegraph system. And of course, the telegraph by then, this is 1888, had been connected through the undersea cable to the United States. So it's quite possible to coordinate these kind of crimes by the telegraph system. And just to give you a flavor, the general instrument room of the General Post Office in London in the 1840s, where about 500 young women worked on coding up or typing out the telegraphs, it was the proper name was the General Instrument Room, but you know what it's called, Bishop? It was called the Imperial Brain. You mentioned earlier the deep state. Now, why wouldn't, this is sort of hypothetical, rhetorical question, why wouldn't a deep state need an imperial brain if it's going to have any chance of success?
That's interesting. This demon face recognition software. Before we get further in, even before we get to the JFK and the MLK assassinations, including Hurricane Katrina, explain to our global spiritual revolution partners again this Serco's, their demon face recognition software. Why do they even have to have this type of software? What's the end game of Serco of having this type of software?
Excellent question, Bishop. And so what Serco has done, it's gone into a joint venture with Imagis Face Recognition Technologies that was founded in 1999 up here in Vancouver by a man with 30 years experience in the FBI, and his name is Oliver Buck Revell. So he joined the FBI in 1964, the year after the assassination of JFK. He stayed 30 years until 1994, and he's alleged to have, and it's never been refuted or rebutted, to raced onto the tarmac and taken his son and his daughter-in-law off Pan Am 103 before it took off at Heathrow and prior to it exploding over Lockerbie in Scotland. And that implies foreknowledge. Now, so he created this company. He founded it, Imagis Face Recognition Technologies. But Serco has gone into a joint venture with Imagis. And very simply, and it's rather horrifying, what Serco appears to be doing is tracking pedophiles or suspected pedophiles through governments and military and law enforcement around the world for the purposes of entrapment and blackmail.
And they are, they're doing this to this very present day. Am I correct in saying that Serco's game, of entrapment and this death betting, is this demonic system of Serco, is it still in play even as we speak?
It's stronger than ever, Bishop, because originally the demon face recognition software was developed by a British company in 1994. Immediately, Serco co-opted it or adopted it because if you want to put an elaborate crime together, like bombing the Oklahoma City, the Murrah building, and you want to make sure that the witnesses and the police, for that matter, are either stood down or intimidated, what you can do over a period of time, and that unfortunately is a reality. Young people, and not necessarily just young people, they go a little wild in their youth and they get into some strange places. They take maybe a bit too much alcohol or drugs, and they wake up in a situation that in retrospect may appear basically like what the spies call a honeypot. That is to say, you've done something to someone, maybe a child, where you may have no knowledge or memory of it because you've been taking the drugs, the kind of drugs that I believe this guy, Nicholas Cruz, took before he was picked up by an Uber vehicle to the school where he shot 17 young people. But going back, so Serco is very good at setting up and then infiltrating key government departments. And it may horrify, but it's best that they know, your listeners, that Serco, which is a British company, which grew out of RCAGB 1929, it became Serco in a 1988 management buyout. It had an initial public offering where various shareholders came in and took the company over, including three governments, the United Kingdom, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and the Singaporean government, and various pension funds and banks, and I can tell you a little bit about that. But basically that meant that Serco controls the United States National Visa Center. And I say to any American that cares to listen, what are you doing, you guys?
Right.
Like handing off the job of bringing in Al-Qaeda sleeper cells into the United States and giving them an alibi and hiding them under deep cover so they can jump out and kill you.
This is amazing. And go right ahead, David. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Go right ahead.
And let me give you a quick resume of some of the other government entities that Serco controls in the United States. It controls the United States Patent and Trademark Office. So it controls the intellectual crown jewels of what is allegedly the greatest military power in the world. But if your enemy controls your crown jewels, then you don't. Right? They control the Defense Ammunition Center. That tracks every item of ammunition around the world, including the ammunition that is being taken by various treasonous organizations within the United States and given to ISIS to kill Americans around the world.
And this is treason. I mean, this, and I think we touched on this last time concerning this four-star general that was chosen by Bill Clinton in the mid-90s. This General John Shalikashvili, the son of former SS Waffen Major Dmitry Shalikashvili, and his father, Dmitry, was a part of this Operation Paperclip. And it's amazing that it almost looks like, feels like, acts like that this entire system here in this country is kind of a Fourth Reich schematical structure. I mean, am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, totally, except it's not the Fourth Reich, it's British intelligence based in the city of London, the famous Square Mile. I don't know if you've heard of that, but people who look at history will know that, for example, the livery companies in the city of London funded the Jamestown colonies. They had a lottery, right? And they funded the creation of the British East India Company, which, over history from 1601 to when Queen Victoria attempted to dissolve it in 1835, it had 200,000 men under arms, and it ran the British Empire. Now, the British Empire is essentially a mercantile organization, right, where it's believed, and I'm not condemning my own nation, if you will, because there are many good things and many bad things that have come through the United Kingdom, just like every other country, right? But But I think who is it? The Art of War, the famous Chinese general. You have to know your enemy, right?
Yes.
Now, what they're brilliant at doing is pointing you at the wrong enemy. Now, when General Shalikashvili he was sent by Bill Clinton, who I believe is a traitor, as is his wife,
Yes.
Hillary Clinton. Bill Clinton sent the chairman of the former late John Shalikashvili, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, to the Beijing University of the People's Liberation Army in 1997. And there's a transcript of Shalikashvili's speech, and at the end of it, he says, "My president has instructed me to leave behind details of all America's weapons programs in the interest of world peace." Well, that's not in the interest of world peace, because now Clinton and his cronies have literally armed and equipped China for World War III.
And again, we're talking about this Serco connection to our global spiritual revolution partners. We are so very blessed to have back world-renowned global forensic economist, the Honorable Mr. David HAWKINS, the Serco connections to the assassinations of JFK, MLK, and Hurricane Katrina. And to our listeners, we're just kind of laying the foundation tonight before we get into JFK and Martin Luther King Jr. And so Serco, it's almost like a shadow government that they control the communications sector of almost every country on the face of the earth. Why has America allowed, not just America, but a lot of other foreign entities, why have we allowed our military-industrial complex to be sourced out to a foreign power like Serco? It makes no sense.
Well, you're right, except that you have to go back a long way into the dust of history to look at. For example, I think as an engineer and a scientist, if you control your enemy's patent office, you control your enemy, right? So now when Serco has, I believe, processed between 2 and 3 million patent applications since it was given the job, outsourced, I believe, by Hillary Clinton, to operate the patent office, what it can do is it can pick out the key technologies that can be put together to create an ad hoc opportunity for a SWAT team, a special weapons and tactics teams, to go into a crime scene, to pay the patentees for the right to use the various patent devices. And that, of course, compromises the patentees. So, for example, for the war games of 9/11, I believe Serco paid Boeing for the right to use up to 4 to 6 or 10 aircraft that had been modified for remotely flying through the autopilot. So either a director of Boeing, now you may be horrified to know that John Shalikashvili, when he stopped being the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, became a director of Boeing.
Wow.
And I believe he was responsible for telling the Boeing fellow directors, and remember, he's a pretty scary guy because he's well connected. He knows some seriously dangerous people, right? During his period as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So he tells Boeing, I want you to move your headquarter office from Washington State down to Chicago, which is Obama country. Right? Now think about it. In 2001, Boeing's headquarters was in transit, so to speak. So the directors of Boeing would have been, let's say, there's an English word, I don't know if that translates, discombobulated, right? So they wouldn't quite know what was going on. The headquarters office was probably placed in charge of a proxy or a law firm, like law of attorney, to manage that transition. And it looks at, my research indicates that the headquarters office of Boeing was actually commissioned on the morning of 9/11. Now just think, there's 8 or 10 or maybe even 20 modified Boeing aircraft, illegally modified, not necessarily illegally, but modified without the knowledge of the pilots, to be flown remotely. They're flying in the skies above the United States, and they're being used to test anti-hijacking technology developed in Canada. Now, as far as the technology is concerned, it doesn't really care whether the good guys are on the ground and the bad guys are in the cockpit, or the good guys are in the cockpit and the bad guys on the ground. So what happens is they're looking for an opportunity where during the war game, the American blue team stands down or is stood down by jamming the communications. So now you can switch from a simulation where 98% of the people believe they're in a legitimate war game because they've had these war games twice a year since 1947, I think. So most of the people in those war games believe they're in a game, in a simulation. A tiny minority understand there's now an opportunity to adjust your insurance policy on the planes carrying the passengers and double your money by killing them all.
And remember, the former CEO, Chris Hyman, was I think during the day of 9/11, had a breakfast meeting at the top of the North Tower on the 106th floor.
You've got excellent recall.
Absolutely. And then, 15, 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes before the jet hit, he just conveniently leaves and goes down to the 42nd floor. That cannot be by accident.
No, there are no coincidences here. So he goes to a breakfast meeting at the Windows of the World restaurant at the top of the North Tower with a British outfit called Risk Waters, where Risk Waters was holding the meetings together with clients and so on. So they're sitting down at a breakfast meeting. My guess is that 8:30, Chris Hyman gets up, and I don't know who he goes down with, but whoever he left behind him, they were all killed. He goes down to the 47th floor. It would appear to the offices of the International Risk Adjusters, I think they're called. And he has a meeting with Serco shareholders. Now that's very interesting because there would be representatives from, if all of the major shareholders in Serco showed up or sent a representative, there would have been a representative from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. But if I remember correctly, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia generated the muscle hijackers from a province in Saudi Arabia called Qassam province. And these people allegedly got their visas in Dubai from the arm of the National Visa Center operated by Serco in the United Arab Emirates. So Serco gave the visas to the muscle hijackers, right, to act as patsies, I believe, because they may or they may not have been on the plane, but many of their relatives say that they've seen them after 9/11.
And this witch, Christine Marcy, a devil from the pit of hell, was she not put in charge of the U.S. The U.S. I believe the U.S. Visa Department, the U.S. The U.S. National Visa Center. I think right before 9/11 that she was put in charge of that. Am I correct in saying that, David?
Let me run back, and as you know, that Christine Marcy is Field McConnell's sister, my colleague. So now he's totally turned against his sister, and I think with very good reason. We've gone back. We probably know more about Christine Marcy's past than her husband, or maybe anyone else alive. So we go back to the period where she joined the bureaucracy in the United States. So in 1968, she joins the Office of Economic Opportunity, and her first three bosses, and I guess whether she's interning or not, I don't know the exact phrase. The first one was Donald Rumsfeld, which is interesting. The second is Dick Cheney. And the third is Frank Carlucci, who is the chairman of the Carlyle Private Equity Group, who on the morning or the day before 9/11 was meeting with members of the Bin Laden family at the Waldorf Astoria in Washington. Now, she goes on to a career that takes her from 1968 to 1978. She becomes the founder or charter member of an organization called the Senior Executive Service. And this was set up by Jimmy Carter to create a cadre of senior bureaucrats, effectively to run the government at the top level of every major government department. And now, so she goes on to create a 10,000-strong bureaucracy. Now, there's a wonderful television series in the United Kingdom called Yes Minister that Maggie Thatcher used to love, and she said it's so tragically true, it's sad. But anyway, the two heroes of that show, it's a BBC show, you have the Prime Minister and Sir Humphrey, who is the head of the civil service. So the Prime Minister says to Sir Humphrey in this thing, I thought the civil service was here to serve Sir Humphrey. And Sir Humphrey says, no, Prime Minister, it's here to grow. Now, those are the universal rules of the bureaucracy. You have a bureaucracy in the United States, 10,000 strong, which runs your government. And irrespective of what Donald Trump thinks he'd like to do, or any of these generals or senior people in any departments, it's the bureaucracy that ultimately decides, because there might be an executive order issued, but by the time it's implemented, the bureaucracy have written their own signature onto it.
Wow. And you know what? Not to get ahead of you, David, I just found out something on yesterday for you concerning Malcolm X, and we'll get to him later on in the broadcast, that on the 21st of February, 1965, he's assassinated at the Audubon Ballroom here in New York City. And at the time, in 1965, the Audubon Ballroom was owned by a film producer by the name of William Fox, whose family today has close ties to Serco. I'll get to that later on. It's shocking, and so that cannot be by accident. So, again, Serco. So where does Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton play into this Serco conspiracy as we're about ready to go forth into JFK and Martin Luther King?
Let me, to do that, I need to just go back to Christine Marcy. So in 1978-79, she becomes the charter member or the founder member of the Senior Executive Service, which goes on to have today about 10,000 senior bureaucrats that are unfireable, unelected, unaccountable, and they run every major government department, including the Department of Justice and Transportation and Defense. So in 1984, this incredibly powerful and dangerous and evil woman does two things, apparently with Eric Holder. She creates a database for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which gives her, in my opinion, access to children who have been detached from whatever reason by their from their parents, and are now fair game for this slave trafficking around the world. The other organization that she sets up is the Department of Justice Asset Forfeiture Fund that she runs with Eric Holder. Now, what that means is, I don't know what car you drive, but let's say, Bishop, you had a Lamborghini and you have a radio show, right? And you're driving down the road.
Sounds good.
Well, and then the local sheriff looks at you and says, for whatever reason, I don't think you come upon this Lamborghini honestly, Bishop Larry. So they confiscate it. And what they do is they say to you, all right, well, you sue us if you think you have acquired it. Now, are you going to take on the government? They've got your Lamborghini, right? And let's say, I'm not saying question, but maybe you've avoided a few taxes, etc., and you've ended up with this vehicle, but you really don't want to go through the court and take on the government and spend thousands of dollars, probably more than the car itself, with high-priced lawyers to get it back. So they take your Lamborghini and they flog it. They realize the cash, and they give it to the sheriff who arrested you. Well, no, not the sheriff who arrested you, the sheriff or the deputies who confiscated the Lamborghini. Now, that is a moral hazard, right?
Oh, big time.
Well, I can tell you now that billions of dollars have flown into the Department of Justice Asset Forfeiture Fund, and I've just checked this morning to see if the Broward County, where the sheriff is saying, the deputy outside the school said, I thought the shots were coming from outside the school, if they were the recipient of some of this money. And lo and behold, 2016, I think they collected about $1.5 million for the various sheriff's toys, including the communication systems that I believe Serco used to tell those sheriffs to stand down because a month before there was a drill at that school where they were testing the ability of the teachers and the students to behave properly in the event of a shooter in the building. So what you have there are the students and the teachers believed, it would appear, that this was a drill, same as Sandy Hook.
Wow. Is this system you may mention before that Bill Clinton and Christine Marcy created in the 90s, this prison, it's from the Hollywood movie Con Air. And not to get ahead of you, but I'm so excited tonight. Can you bring up that system, that particular system?
Sure.
It's the alien transportation system. Yeah.
In 1988, December 1988, Phil's sister, Christine Marcy, called him and said that her problem was bringing prisoners from Hawaii to the mainland, and apparently the airlines didn't want them shackled to the seats for safety reasons, right? So she said to her brother, we're thinking of buying some planes and having our own service, okay? But how would we handle a mutiny of prisoners? So Phil McConnell told his sister, well, you drone the plane. Now, unbeknown to him then, his sister had let's see, 1984, 4 years of experience of taking money from people, like yourself, driving Lamborghinis around, right?
Yes.
And popping it into a fund, and then paying, local people to look the other way, let's say, when there's a crime coming down. So anyway, she then evidently dipped into this huge slush fund, Department of Justice Asset Forfeiture Fund, and by 1994, with the full knowledge and consent of, in my opinion, the treasonous Bill Clinton and his equally treasonous wife, she launched JPATS, which is the Justice, Prisoner, and Alien Transportation System. And I don't know how many planes that she had. I'm very confident, however, that she modified those planes to prevent a mutiny where they could be hijacked or re-hijacked electronically. So if there was a mutiny, the plane could be landed safely. Now, if you're a prisoner on one of those planes, that's pretty scary, isn't it?
Oh, big time.
If you know that the
big
people
time.
who are going to be putting you, because as far as I can see, Christine Marcy doubled the incarcerated population. And obviously I know and you know that there's a very high percentage of black people in the prison system in the United States. But what Christine Marcy could do, of course, is she could radicalize these people if they weren't radicalized anyway. One of the ways she can do it, she can say to a guy or a woman for that matter, I can put you in a cell where you really have some pretty incompatible cellmates. Now, you just think, if you're going away, let's say you're a young woman or a young man, and you're going away for 5 years in a jail, right? Depending, your quality of life is going to be a very, very dependent on which cell you're in with, or which jail you're in. Now, what she did, again, I think I would be happy. First of all, I'm very happy to be talking to you, Bishop. But equally, if you can transmit the danger of this woman, because one of the things she did around the 1994 period is she launched the United States Marshal Service Prisoner Medical Services Program. Now, what that means, of course, is she has access to prisoners who can't go anywhere else, and she can put psychotropic medication in their treatment, and basically you've got the people. I don't know if you've seen the pictures of this guy, Nicholas Cruz, at his first hearing. He's shackled, he's in his yellow jumpsuit or whatever it is. He's got eyes like saucers. He's completely doped out.
Right.
He's on psychotropic drugs, which he was when he went to the school. So Christine Marcy has the ability to put together a group of prisoners on parole, put them in an aircraft, fly them to a crime scene before the crime occurs, do a hit, get back into the aircraft and fly them to another jail, and they're back for dinner, and with a nearly perfect alibi.
This is demonic. This is wicked.
You've got it. That's
wicked.
the key word. That's the key word. And you probably
Serco,
uniquely understand what demons are. not uniquely,
Oh my
but
God.
people of your
Yeah.
faith understand how Lucifer, or whatever you choose to call it, gets inside the system, pretends to be the friend, and basically eats away the inside of the spiritual universe that we would choose or hope to live in.
And you know what? I'm so glad that you brought the spiritual aspect of that up. We had a guest on some time ago, and we talked about the history and the origins of Planned Parenthood here in the United States, and a woman by the name of Margaret Sanger, who created Planned Parenthood back in the early 1900s. She had purposely targeted African American families. Instead of her going to Midtown Manhattan here or going to Hollywood, where her boyfriend, Cecil B. DeMille, was her boyfriend, she went straight to Harlem. All right, in 1930, after a meeting she had with W.E.B. Du Bois, and purposely wanted to create a eugenics program in the African American community. I don't want to get off into that, but maybe later on. But to our global spiritual revolution partners, I'm excited tonight. We have back with us world-renowned global forensic economist, the Honorable Mr. David Hawkins. Continue to send in your questions right now at Global Spiritual Revolution Radio at yahoo.com. Again, quickly, beloved, Global Spiritual Revolution Radio at yahoo.com. There was a stat that came out today, and we're getting ready to go into JFK here in about 2 minutes. There was a stat that came out today from Washington, D.C., from the Census Bureau, that there are more black men today, 850,000 black men incarcerated today, which is more than the total population of slaves up until the Civil War. Now, can you imagine that? There are more black men. I'm not even talking about black women. There are more black men incarcerated within the U.S. penal system than there were slaves during the time of slavery up until the Civil War. And Serco is a major factor in this. And am I correct in saying that, David, that the Hanner Circle is also within the prison industrial complex?
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, what Serco has been doing, it's got arrangements with Wackenhut and Correction Corporation Limited, etc. And these private companies, they run private prisons. Now, I think that's a very important statistic you just mentioned, because I think there are many black men who've been incarcerated, let's say by Christine Marcy and her ilk, who are ultimately, of course, and almost inevitably radicalized. I imagine you go through that process, you come out the other end, and you're angry, and you're looking for revenge. If you've got the ability to give these people drugs, psychotropic drugs, which have as a side effect homicidal ideation or suicidal ideation, you've effectively got a group of people who go back into society, and it's like a powder keg waiting to explode. So I think Christine Marcy and her cronies in the Department of Justice and the bureaucracy have purposely created what I would call as an insurrectionist movement that's buried deep now in the United States. And they may be your next door neighbor. And let's say a black community has within itself some black people who've been through that process, and they're basically double agents, if you will. Now, when you go back to Sanger, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe Sanger said all we need is to create a personable black man to lead the black community into genocide or whatever, depopulation. And I think, I'll be very cruel, I think that's Obama.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And that's why it's such a thrill to be talking with you, because you can understand that, Larry, uniquely, probably better than anyone who could ever interview me.
Oh, man. And, in 1929, again, not to get ahead of you, I'm so excited that you're on the air tonight, Mr. Hawkins, concerning one of the most famous African-American heroes, supposedly, in history, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, who a lot of people in the African-American community don't know that he was a radicalized socialist and communist who took 4 trips to the Soviet Union, back in 1926, 36, 49, and 58. But Du Bois met with Margaret Sanger, and Du Bois was helping her to set up the first black eugenics clinic in 1930, and Du Bois said to her, it would be a great idea if you would approach pastors. You're talking about going to a legitimate leader, because 9 times out of 10, in the African American church, whatever that pastor says, the congregation will follow. And the very first person, pastor that she met was Dr. Adam Clayton Powell Sr. of the Abyssinia Baptist Church, and thereby he met all of the pastors in 1930 to bring about the first black genocidal clinic. That's wicked, David. But they use the African American pastors. That's what she did, and it is so wicked.
Yes. And that's, I believe, what Jeremiah wrote. I mean, I've seen these Jeremiah rants, God damn America, God damn America. And apparently in his audience, you have Obama applauding with his wife, Michelle Obama. And you know what? I believe Michelle Obama is an out-and-out racist.
Yes, she is. Oh, absolutely. I'm so glad, again, not to be redundant, I'm so happy that you're on the broadcast tonight, because to our Global Spiritual Revolution partners, this great teacher, the Honorable Mr. David Hawkins, a world-renowned global forensic economist, we are discussing the Serco connections to the assassinations of JFK, MLK, and Hurricane Katrina. Barack Obama did a lot of his studies in Moscow, and that's not known in the African American community. And so, his thesis, his dissertations at Occidental College, at Columbia, and Harvard, they're classified. Why? That doesn't make any sense. And so we talk about Du Bois going over to the Soviet Union, and many of the black leaders during the 1920s, Paul Robeson, went over to be taught by the Soviets. And we brought up this woman's name, and not to get ahead of you, David, this Bernadine Dorn. Again, you talk about Michelle Obama being wicked. Bernadine Dorn, that's not even her real last name. Her last name is Ornstein, capital OHRNSTEIN. Her father, Bernard Ornstein, had changed his name from Ornstein to Dorn, which is more of a German name. And doing some heavy studying today, that I have a pastor friend in Chicago. We were talking today that the family of Bernadine Dorn, she had a great-great-grandfather that was involved in the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. And that this last name, Ornstein, was amongst the names of parts of those who worked with Lenin and Trotsky and Stalin during the 1917 October Bolshevik Revolution. And also, you talk about, there's a book called Rules for Radicals, not to get ahead of you, but Saul Alinsky's parents, Benjamin Alinsky, and Sarah Tannenbaum, immigrated to Chicago in the late 1920s. They came from the Soviet Union, but they worked, his parents, with Stalin, Lenin, and Trotsky. So you're touching a lot of nerves with him. Go ahead, David.
Well, every name that you bring up is so fascinating, because Bernadine Dorn, she was one of the leaders of Students for Democratic Society, and the Weather Underground organization with Bill Ayers, and they're psychopathic killers, these two, right? They plotted, I believe, to implement their revolution. They reckoned they would have to kill 25 million Americans. And Bernardine Dawn is the mentor of Obama and his wife. Now, Bernardine Dawn, she skated because basically, I believe the FBI had been infiltrated. So what they were trying to do would demonstrate, they go to a judge and get some wiretap information, and the judge would be persuaded to rule that that was flouting her rights because the information had been acquired illegally. Anyway, she bounces around, and she ends up as a professor at Northwestern University. And one of her seminars, I mean, it's hard to believe, is entitled Torture, Paradigms and Practice. Now, do you want your young people to go to Northwestern University and be taught by this? Can I call her a bitch?
Yes, absolutely. Oh my God, that's evil. I mean, absolutely evil. Because if that's you and I, we'd be in prison right now.
Correct.
That's nice. You can be on the FBI's most wanted list, and then the next day have a job at Northwestern University. Go figure. And
prior to that, she was taken on by Sidley Austin, the law firm that employed Michelle LaVaughn Robinson, who was the daughter of a ward healer, a really radical, black woman who hates whites. And you see, the point is, the general picture of this, it's pure Saul Alinsky. Saul Alinsky said, rub raw the sores of discontent. And what the British are very good at with their propaganda and their news and their entertainment is doing exactly that. If you look at the news media, you'll see they're continuously creating these, you might call them fictional terrorist groups, which is Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And I'm saying to people, these people should be treated as criminal groups. They use terror as an instrument, right? So you don't go after the instrument, you go after the criminal organization and you take it down. I believe Serco is a racketeering influence and corrupt organization where in 48 hours Trump or someone, and that's why we keep Able Danger writing to General Kelly, who's a Marine, I don't know, 4-star Marine, and he's the chairman of the White House Chief of Staff. And at Able Danger, we've got up to a briefing 225. And essentially what I write these technical stuff, and it's a bit dry, and some people have trouble following it, but my objective is to publish it on the internet so that everyone knows that General Kelly ought to know, right, and take the appropriate action. And tomorrow, for example, I would like him to have Christine Marcy and a woman, and we can come to that, called Dr. Pamela Drew, taken into custody. And this guy, Oliver Buck Revels, who's 30 years with the FBI, and he's the founder of this Imagus face recognition technologies company up in BC, where Imagus and Serco are tracking pedophiles or reputed or suspected pedophiles through the internet, which means to say whether you are a pedophile or not, through photoshopping, they can create the impression to the public that you are. And if you put a guy, let's say a woman or a man in a prison, right, whether it's black or white, and they believe that you're a pedophile, you're probably not going to get out alive.
Oh,
that's control,
is so
right?
Wicked. That's control. And I'm reading here, David, that one of Serco's clients, and I want all the Global Spiritual Revolution partners to hear me. One of Serco's clients is Penn State University. I'm thinking, okay, out of all the universities in the world, and here in the United States, Penn State is one of the key universities that's on Serco's list as clients. Well, if you remember back in 2011, that sex scandal at Penn State University. And I remember that very vividly, that I believe it was 2011, and Jerry Sandusky, who was an assistant football coach for the Penn State Nittany Lions, and that sex abuse scandal, where Penn State University is one of the main clients for Serco. That's interesting.
Right. Right. And Serco has a very interesting surveillance alibi in Chicago, because the Chicago city authorities have given Serco the job of parking enforcement. But Serco is also the preferred supplier to Boeing of command, control, communications, computers, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. And I allege, and Phil McConnell and I allege, that Hull House, which was set up by Jane Addams in 1889 on a return from Whitechapel, was operated as a pedophile brothel, and it was shut down in January of 2011. And used to entrap people, the high and mighty in Chicago. And then you and I, the last time we chatted, I still remember it to this day, is because I was able to talk to you, I thought, constructively about the Down Low Club. I don't know if you remember that conversation.
Yes. Oh, my. And to our listeners, I'm telling you, a lot of you have never heard of the Down Low Club. You got to listen to this right now because this literally blew your mind. Mr. Hawkins, explain to our listeners, what is the Down Low Club and who are the major players in this?
Okay, well, I believe Jeremiah Wright, Dr. Jeremiah Wright, or Pastor Jeremiah Wright, was a major player. And as I understand it, and I'm sure you'll be able to correct me if I've got it wrong. Now, an ugly black lesbian, right? And when I say ugly, it doesn't mean to be how she looks. It means spiritually ugly. That is to say, the average heterosexual man wants nothing to do with her, needs to have cover. I think they called it in the sort of slang, the beard, to a relationship which can look like a normal marriage. And I believe, my understanding is that Michelle Obama, or prior to that, it was Michelle LaVaughn Robinson, and some people say it was Michael LaVaughn Robinson, because I don't know where Michael LaVaughn Robinson is, right? But Michael or Michelle Michael LaVaughn Robinson apparently is a player who said, "I feel like a woman in man's body," right? So whatever, and you correction if I'm way out of line here. But anyway, Michelle LaVaughn Robinson evidently is not very appealing to the average heterosexual male. So she needed a young, gay black man to develop a relationship with, or a perceived relationship with. So she meets Barack Obama through Valerie Jarrett in Chicago, because Obama joined Sidley Austin as an intern or whatever when she, that is to say Michelle LaVaughn Robinson, was working with Bernadine Dawn at Sidley Austin. So they set up a relationship. I think they get married in 1991. As far as I can see, both the Obamas had their law licenses revoked for whatever reason. Anyway, it's possible that to complete the relationship, they go and adopt a couple of kids from the Chicago medical hospitals, and suddenly you've got, at first blush, the perfect black family. Highly educated. He can be quite charming. He's very articulate. He's got a good speaker. He's got his 3 degrees, albeit none of his records have been released. They're all sealed at Occidental and Columbia and Harvard. But just to remind listeners, when he was 7 years old, he was living with his mother and his stepfather in Jakarta in Indonesia. And they chose, that's Ann Dunham, the mother, and Lolo Swetoro was the stepfather, who was probably working with Indonesian intelligence, etc. They assign, the poor young lad, he gets a cross-dressing male prostitute as a nanny.
He's Turdy,
Now, what a wonderful name for a cross-dressing male prostitute. It's Turdy. But anyway, I'm being facetious, right? So how would you succeed in life if you're a 7-year-old boy and you're being groomed by a cross-dressing male prostitute called Turdy? You've got a lot working against you.
Man. It's like the whole family was packaged together. Packaged, Wow.
Exactly, by British intelligence.
And with British intelligence, it seems like the entirety, the entire entity of the United States of America is still controlled by the British Empire. Am I correct in saying that, sir?
Oh, and that's such a good point. And I'm so glad that that you see the world very similar to myself. And I go back to that point about the Patent Office, and just a little bit of history there. So in 1776, you guys, right, you get your independence, or you think you get your independence. Declaration of Independence written by, I believe, amongst others, 7 people who were barristers at the British Inns of Court, right? It doesn't address the debt, because when the title was granted, I think by, was it Charles I or whatever, to the Jamestown colonists, it was granted in perpetuity, right? That means a long time. Now,
yes, sir.
So in 1776, there was a rifle registered in the British Patent Office, invented by a Scotsman called Charles Ferguson, that was used in the Battle of Brandywine, right, where the rebels, or colonists at the time, fought the British. But this rifle, had it been widely distributed amongst the British Army, right, you could fire 6 to 10 rounds a minute from a breech-loaded prone position. So had that been used, then the colonists were using muzzle-loaded rifles that took about a minute to load for each bullet. The outcome of the revolution would have been changed completely, but I digress. In 1802, President Jefferson, I think it is, appoints an Anglo-American by the name of Dr. William Thornton as the first superintendent of the United States Patent and Trademark Office. So you've really got British influence right at the beginning of the Patent Office. In 1814, a man, I think his name is either John Hall or John Hunt, goes to William Thornton, who was incidentally the architect of the Capitol building, and say, I've got a rifle, I want it patented. And Thornton said to him, it's already been invented. It hadn't. I mean, there were obviously some quite major differences. However, Thornton said to this guy, however, if you put my name on the patent, I'll grant you the patent. So already at the beginning of the 19th century, quite possibly a British agent was manipulating the processes at the United States Patent and Trademark Office to enrich or at least transfer authority or maintain authority back in the United Kingdom. In 1822, Thornton dies. In 1836, the Patent Office, Bishop, burnt down. Right? And I think the first 10,000 patents invented by Americans in the Republic were transferred back to the United Kingdom to boost the Industrial Revolution.
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
In World War I and World War II, the Alien Property Custodian Office that had the access to all the German and Japanese and Italian and Turkish patents was set up in Chicago, and in the custody of Northern Trust. And Northern Trust, they were the guys who gave Obama a mortgage way beyond his means to spend it at the time he was a senator, and he bought a mansion in Chicago. So he's been riding off the hog, this guy, but I think he's a fraud.
Oh, big time. Absolutely. I believe that this Barack Hussein Obama is the biggest fraud ever heaped upon the American public. And what is so sad, they thought, the deep state thought, by getting a black man, that the lives of black people would improve. David, it's just the opposite. I mean, he tripled the debt.
If I may interrupt, I don't think their objective was to improve the life of the black people. They wanted to put up a personable figurehead that would allow them to manipulate black perceptions. And we get back to this Alinsky, rubbing raw the swords of contempt. I think the white community and the black community are both being manipulated.
Yes. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And it's interesting, and don't mean to go all over the map here, but you're hitting some powerful nerves with me. Every founder of the NAACP, the NAACP was founded on February the 12th, 1909. And every founder from W.E.B. Du Bois, Ida B. Wells, Archibald Grimmick, Henry Moskowitz, a Jewish lawyer who put up the money to start the NAACP, Mary White Overton, Oswald Garrison Villard, William English Whaling, Florence Kelly, Charles Edward Russell, every one of them were communists. They went to the Soviet Union during the 1920s and early 30s, and the NAACP, and I know a lot of African-American people are going to get upset with me when what I'm about to say, not to get ahead of you, David, but the NAACP, the National Urban League, Rainbow Push, all these black organizations, CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Committee, all of these black groups are funded, and they're still funded with communist money. And if you try to tell the average black person this, they think, they call me an Uncle Tom. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, we tread on toes, you see, but it's fascinating, you see, because quite obviously you have a lot of scholarship into these issues on the black side of the fence, and there shouldn't be a fence between us. And I and Able Danger, we do a lot of research on the other side of the fence. Our interests are common, and I often say to people, look, the only thing I'm interested in is testing the truth values of news being injected from a crime scene. Right? That's a famous Jefferson comment, isn't it? That an informed public will make the right decision.
Yeah, absolutely. What I'm about to say, I agree with you 1,000,000%. Able Danger and Global Spiritual Revolution Radio, we have the same common goal to our listeners, and that is the truth. The truth. Yes. And and as we're talking about Serco's connection to JFK, MLK, and Hurricane Katrina, I'm so excited that you're here with us tonight, David. What is Serco's connection? I believe there's some links on the Able Danger website. What is Serco's connection to the assassinations of John F. Kennedy? We'll start with him, and then we'll go to Martin Luther King and to Katrina. Let's start with JFK. What is Serco's connection to his killing?
Okay, before I can go there, Bishop, I've got to go back to the history of the communication systems used by Serco and its predecessors that enable an organization with evil intent to coordinate a remote assassination or a mass casualty event, right? So in 1901, Marconi demonstrated his wireless telegraph system at Toynbee Hall, which is the place where Jane Addams of Chicago stayed with her friend, what's her name, Ellen Starr, in 1888, during the period of the prostitute murders in Whitechapel. She comes back to the United States and sets up the University Settlement Movement House, Hull House in Chicago. Moving on, so you've got Marconi demonstrating this system, which was to revolutionize communications, because up to then it was all radio and, limited radio, but underwater cable. So in 1911, the communication systems with the Titanic was the Marconi wireless telegraph system. Now, we mentioned earlier about David Sarnoff, the founder of RCA. He was on the wireless telegraph system in New York, allegedly communicating with the Titanic. There was a man called William Stevenson, the man that Winston Churchill called the man called Intrepid, who was a spy master for the British Coordination Unit in New York, in the offices of the Rockefeller Center. So he was, in 1911, a 16-year-old wireless telegraph operator and very experienced. Apparently, the bridge, the captain had gone to his bunk, but the Titanic, they were attempting a world Atlantic speed record, so it was going full speed ahead. It got a message to change course because there was an ice pack ahead of it. If it hadn't have changed course, now people can cross-check this, and this is speculation, it would have missed the ice bags. It looks like it was called onto the iceberg by a ship, a Canadian ship called the SS Mount Temple, the other side of the iceberg. So, of course, that was a major event, but it shows you the power potentially of having a global communication system where you can hack into, let's say, for example, the instructions that are being sent to the Titanic and every subsequent vehicle, including cars and boats and planes. So fast forward, in 1922 or thereabouts, the United States Navy said, we don't want to be reliant on British technology for our communications. So as far as I understand, they confiscated all of the Marconi patents and they formed RCA, Radio Corporation of America, that would have been described by David Sarnoff as a radio patent monopoly company. But I think behind the doors, they had an arrangement, both countries, where they would share access to patents in order to control the world through what Rockefeller would subsequently describe as a supranational government of world bankers and an intellectual elite. Now, where did Serco come from? Go ahead.
No, go ahead, David.
Okay. So in 1929, RCA in New York sets up a British subsidiary called RCAGB 1929, and it maintains close communications with the headquarters office in New York as far as the use of patented technology for radio communications. Fast forward to 1941, it would appear that they had hacked into the communications of the United States military, and they were able to stand down various components of the United States military prior to the Pearl Harbor attack. The Imperial Japanese Navy was financed in its rearming for the aircraft carriers and so on by two banks, N.M. Rothschild and HSBC. And a treasonous Scottish man by the name of Lord Arthur Semple took all of the designs and patents of the Royal Navy to the Imperial Japanese Navy and built and trained and schooled them in the use of aircraft carriers for the Pearl Harbor attack. So it's incredibly powerful. You have the opportunity, once you've got access to these radio and communication systems, you can launch what are known as man-in-the-middle attacks on your enemy. And the British are very good at man-in-the-middle attacks. So on 9/11, if I look at the disposition of forces and the way the assets were moved on 9/11, it's identical to Pearl Harbor. The American military was stood down. And Washington went blind, deaf, and dumb. And the core technologies were in Chicago because Boeing had moved from Washington State to Chicago, and the Boeing uninterruptible autopilot wrapped up in its patents. I believe that office was commissioned on the morning of 9/11 to support a man-in-the-middle attack on Boeing. Because if you remember, which Boeing director has ever been interviewed about what happened to their equipment? I mean, this is a major breakdown of security. It would be legitimate to say to the board of directors of Boeing, all right, come and explain us why your aircraft are not protected against these attacks inside the cockpit. And of course, they won't answer, or if they did, the guy who put that conspiracy together is now dead. That's John Shalikashvili.
Oh, my goodness. Wow. Wow. This is mind-blowing. Go ahead.
And Serco is the preferred supplier of command control communications computers, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance to the world's largest military and civilian aircraft manufacturer, Boeing, in Chicago. And there are no coincidences. So I believe Obama and Michelle and Bernardine Dawn and Bill Ayers and Northern Trust and the Down Low Club, they conspired together using, for example, entrapment and sexual extortion to keep witnesses silent. And basically, they've got the technology to launch a man-in-the-middle attack on the United States out of Chicago on 9/11.
Oh, man. And this insurance company out of the UK, the Willis Faber Company, tell us a little bit, what is their connection to the Titanic.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, they're insurance brokers, and it so happens that when I started my artificial intelligence company in the United Kingdom, one of my directors is a former chairman of Willis Faber, which is one of the Lloyd's underwriter syndicates. So you go to a syndicate and you say, I want to insure the Titanic, and they parcel off the risks to various of their names, right? My brother in Australia, he was a name. And what you do is you can get in the UK, your insurance payouts out of Lloyd's are tax-free. So it's quite attractive to go in to Lloyd's as an investor. However, you risk all of your assets if a major hurricane or the sinking of the Titanic. So the Lloyd's people, they do very well in the good years, but if there's an orchestrated event, like the Katrina levees giving way, then they pay out a great deal of money. So Willis Faber insured the Titanic, or arranged insurance on the Titanic. It also, Bishop, arranged the insurance on the Twin Towers.
Wow.
And they adjusted the insurance 6 weeks before they both came down, such that if both towers came down in the same day, they doubled their money.
I'm so glad too that you said that. I got a very conservative radio host friend here in the city that had told me also kind of piggyback on what you just said concerning the Willis Faber Company there in London, and to our Global Spiritual Revolution partners we have with this David HAWKINS, world-renowned global forensic economist, the Serco connections to the assassinations of JFK, MLK, and Hurricane Katrina, only here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio. According to a good friend of mine, I'm not going to say his name just to protect him, but that the Willis Faber Company also had an insurance policy covered the Alfred P. Morrow Federal Building in Oklahoma City.
I don't know that, but possibly, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And definitely. So this Willis Faber Company, which is now called Willis Faber and Dumas. And so where is J.P. Morgan in all of this too? J.P. Morgan as far as the Titanic, RCA. Where does this multi-billionaire play a part in this cabal or this conspiracy, specifically about the Titanic?
Well, let me go fast forward to that shareholder meeting on the 47th floor of the North Tower on the morning of 9/11. Christopher Hyman, the former and disgraced chief executive officer, makes a presentation to shareholders who would have sent a representative. So one of those shareholders is J.P. Morgan.
J.P. Morgan.
Right? Together with 9 or other banks that are the so-called global custodians, including BNY Mellon, Bank of New York Mellon. And those 10 or so global custodians operate pension funds. For example, Northern Trust is a shareholder in Serco. It was the alien property custodian in World War I and World War II in Chicago. And the sum of investments under management, they don't own it, but they're managing it for pension funds, is $86 trillion. So on the 47th floor, you got Christopher Hyman making a presentation to shareholders. Now, he's never been hauled in by the Department of Justice or the FBI to say, well, what did you say to these guys? Why were you there, and who was there? So you've got $86 trillion of assets under management by the global custodians who are shareholders of Serco. Then you have 2 key pension funds. Now, you remember Rockefeller said the world is ready to move to a supranational government of world bankers and an intellectual elite. Well, 2 big pension funds that are shareholders in Serco. One is the Teachers, TIAA. The full name used to be Teachers Insurance Annuity Association College Retirement Equity Fund. I believe it's the biggest private pension fund in the world, right? And it has the retirement benefits of, I don't know, 4 to 5 or 6 million people who've been faculty at universities in the United States. Well, 2 for a start is Bill and Hillary Clinton, right? And another 2 is Barack and Michelle Obama. So if you want a radicalized intellectual elite ready to destroy the United States, well, why wouldn't you put the pension fund in bed with the big global custodians on the 47th floor of the North Tower to place bets on the body count?
Death betting.
You got it.
Wow.
Assassination or death betting. So going back to JFK, the first use of what is known as spread betting was developed or invented by JFK's maths teacher. I forget the guy's name. I think it had a Scottish name, at his secondary school, wherever that was. And this guy then went to Chicago and set up as a spread betting bookmaker and pioneered spread betting, on sports results. But I don't know if you ever heard of spot fixing, but spot fixing is where you place bets, let's say, on in rugby, when I played rugby, when a ball is kicked into touch, you might say it's in the first quarter or the second quarter. So there's a lot of gambling on spread betting and spot fixing, and spot fixing is illegal because it can take place during, let's say, a Wimbledon tennis competition, and you bet on something that doesn't change the overall results, but let's say that the fourth game in the third set goes to 6 or 7 rounds. So in Chicago, there's a big community that of people that I believe are engaged in what's known as death pool betting or assassination betting. So when an event occurs, like a plane being taken off its regular en route airway and starts heading towards the North Tower or the South Tower, they start betting on the body counts for given areas. Again, this is demonic. So you can bet on the body counts for the fire department of New York. Would you believe 343 firefighters died in those 2 towers when they were demolished around them? How evil is that?
That's
because they were ambushed. They sabotaged the Motorola radios, sent them into the building, and then pulled the building down. Now, what does that do? That sends a message to the surviving members of the fire department of New York, who are now terrified because they know the bad guys can pull a building down around their ears.
And that JFK's, there's an article in the Independent magazine online by the 1930s, JFK's math teacher turned Chicago bookmaker. And it doesn't give his name, but I find that to be that's powerful. You're blowing my mind, Brother Hawkins. We have with us David Hawkins. We might have to keep you here all night. I don't know. We have David Hawkins all the way from Vancouver, British Columbia. Hey, man, we are speaking on the circle connections to the assassinations of JFK and Martin Luther King, including Hurricane Katrina. So John F. Kennedy, kind of walk us through this historical matriculation. Matriculate us through this. What is the assassination of John F. Kennedy? How is that connected to Serco in your studies?
Okay, so we've got Serco is in its original incarnation at RCA. Effectively, you can describe it as a radio or wireless or internet monopoly company. That is to say, it doesn't own these patents, but it controls the people who do through fear. So I think Serco is a RICO, a racketeering, influence, and corrupt organization. For example, it's the largest or preferred supplier of command and control equipment to Boeing. And sitting behind Serco and its shareholders are 10 global custodians with $80 trillion of assets under management and 2 pension funds, TIAA, which controls or will be providing pensions to Bill and Hillary Clinton, both of whom were on faculty at Arkansas, and Michelle and Barack Obama. And of course, that compromises them. Right? They say we don't know what this outfit is investing in. Well, one of the outfits it's investing in is Serco, which was on the 47th floor of Tower Number 1 on 911, where everyone at that meeting survived, but no one in the windows of the world survived, where the chief executive officer, Christopher Hyman, had left at about probably 8:30. Right? The other teachers' pension fund, and remember, I believe most of the teachers or professors or faculty in North American universities, including Canada and the United Kingdom, are either left or extreme left wing individuals. Right?
Wow.
You don't get, well, you see, and I really hate that term left and right, but it's, I suppose, convenient. Yes. You could say socialistly inclined or communistically inclined. And remember, when Bill Clinton went to Oxford University as a Rhodes Scholar in 1969, he was kicked out for rape and dealing in drugs, and he went to Moscow. All right? Wow. Now, in 1968, he was elected to the Phi Beta Kappa Honor Society. And Phi Beta Kappa is the oldest honor society in the United States, and it dates to 1776, which is an interesting year.
Wow.
And the other Greek life society, as it's called, is Kappa Beta Phi, which is obviously the inverse of Phi Beta Kappa. And there's only one. Whilst they both started in the same year, the Declaration of Independence, they both started in the year. The footprint of Kappa Beta Phi, which are basically a bunch of Yahoo drinking type characters who would become billionaires, was about the same as Phi Beta Kappa. But then it's been whittled down, and there's only one Kappa Beta Phi chapter left. And it was set up, very interestingly, in 1929, at the beginning of the Great Depression in New York and Wall Street. So these are the billionaires and the multimillionaires, right? And lo and behold, the grand swipe, and in English, swipe would be sort of slang for someone who's stealing something. The grand swipe of Kappa Beta Phi in, I believe, 2016 was one Wilbur Ross, who is now the Commerce Secretary for Trump.
Yes.
After a career of 25 years with N.M. Rothschild. And Serco's investment banker is N.M. Rothschild. And the man who restructured Trump's debts, which were $4 billion in 1990, was Wilbur Ross.
Wow. Now they
so
want
I
to pay
think
back.
NM, yes, you got it right. Now, apparently Trump, but no one invested in Trump. Wow. And I'm not being disrespectful because he's a high-risk guy, you see. But they've lent him money because he has the charisma to say, all right, well, I can't pay you now, but if you send me bankrupt, you'll get nothing. So I think what they said to Trump was, well, N.M. Rothschild and the world bankers, $4 billion was a lot of money in 1990. It's a lot of money now, right? They said to Trump, well, okay, well, we'll make you president. You can pay us back then.
Exactly. Man. So, again, you hit a nerve with me again, this Phi Beta Kappa and this Kappa Beta Phi. So can we therefore say that this Kappa Beta Phi is more of the Wall Street bankers, and the Phi Beta Kappa is more of those in the liberal arts and sciences around the intellectuals. In the intellectuals. Wow.
Yeah, that's the intellectual elite. Now, 17 presidents, 38 Supreme Court judges, and over 100 Nobel Prize winners have been Phi Beta Kappa. On the morning of 9/11, there were 2 women in the Presidential Emergency Operating Center below the White House, right, when George Bush had been carefully put out of position at the elementary school in Florida, right? And there were 2 women either side of Dick Cheney, who was Christine Mars's boss back in the 1969-1970 period. They were both Phi Beta Kappa. You know who they were? We got one whitey and one blackie.
Who was that?
We got Condoleezza Rice, and Lynn Cheney.
Wow.
So I ask you, Larry, where do you think the power was? Do you think it was Dick Cheney? Or do you think the two women knew what was going on? You know what was going on there? There was an attempted coup d'etat on the United States by, doesn't matter whether you're black or white or brown or Hindu or Muslim or Christian, it was an attempt to move to a supranational government where the national identity of the republic would be trashed, all right, of world bankers and an intellectual elite. And if that fourth plane had hit the Capitol building, remember the architect was William Thornton, right? If that fourth plane had hit the Capitol building where there was a joint meeting of the Senate and the Congress, there would have been 535 dead congressmen and senators. America would have been decapitated.
Oh, man. That's scary. I remember you telling us that on the TV portion some weeks or months ago. That is so scary. I believe God had protected the United States because, like you said, we would have been big time decapitated. And again, this JFK, why was he such a threat to the establishment? I know back in, 62, early 63, he was here in New York City giving a speech exposing the secret societies. What was the number one or two? What just reveal to us as we're connecting these historical dots between Serco, beginning with JFK. What was it that he scared the establishment so bad that they had to take him out?
I think, and again, this is speculation, I think he'd recognized two secret societies set up by the British in 1776 as an organization that had access to almost, to all intents and purposes, infinite financial resources. And it's a wonderful speech. And he gives the statement, these are guerrillas by night and not armies by day. I always remember that. He was a wonderful speaker. I presume actually it was a script writer. So he saw this organization. I think we, with the gift of hindsight, we can see now the parameters of what that Phi Beta Kappa and Kappa Beta Phi organization, but both of them, I believe, have really sordid initiation ceremonies. That is to say, you don't get to be Phi Beta Kappa or Kappa Beta Phi unless you've gone through a process where, let's face it, there's a strong probability they've got photographs of you doing something that you'd rather die than show to your mummy and daddy.
Man,
so in 1968, he becomes, as is Bill Clinton, Phi Beta Kappa. But remember, he gets kicked out of Oxford for rape and drug dealing. You know, the charisma stuff is really a devastating distraction because a lot of people, unfortunately, are attracted by charisma, and they disengage their brain. I think William Somerset Maugham said something about the willing suspension of disbelief. You want to believe these characters. Same with Obama. But you strip away the rhetoric and the oratorical flourishes and all the rest of it, and these are empty suits. There's nothing there except hate.
Nothing there. And it takes him 1 hour to answer a 5-minute question.
Right.
He does that on purpose. He does that, not to get off script here concerning Serco's connection with beginning with JFK here tonight. You ask Barack Obama a question, and it takes him an hour, but he knows. Barack Obama knows exactly what he is doing. He wants, and that is a Saul Alinsky. That comes right out of the Saul Alinsky playbook. You know, wear him down, take an hour, 2 hours to answer a 5-minute question. I mean, by the time he gets done, you done forgot what you asked him. You know.
Right.
This JFK. Go ahead.
Okay. Now JFK. All right. So now, what I believe we've done at Able Danger, we've established the MO of these crimes that stretch back to 1776, if you will. And that is to say, the British, I'm sure, didn't invent this, but they perfected this technique. You need a highly trained hit team, right, to get into position. You need to stand down the security of the target, right? And then you basically need a way of injecting news into the media so that just as the target perhaps is expiring, right, the media is being told what happened, right? So the first conspiracy theory is anything coming out of the government that describes what happened at the event prior to anyone doing a proper crime scene investigation, which requires time and effort, right?
Yes.
So, for example, with JFK, there is a man, and I strongly recommend your listeners look at the video, a man called James E. Files, right? James E. Files. Now, you and I think we talked about this. When you see JFK, the Zapruder camera, and I'll come to that because this relates to the patent office. A man called Zapruder was given a Zoomatic Bell & Howell camera, top of the range. I think they called it a director's camera. His secretary brought it from his office and gave it to him, and he was propped up on a concrete plinth or a lamppost, filming JFK as he came through Dealey Plaza. And just for your listeners' sake, I was at Cambridge when he was shot. I was playing bridge at Cambridge. Someone stuck their head around the room where I was playing bridge with some friends and said they have shot Kennedy. Now, I didn't read too much, but, the individual definitely said they. So I don't know, I put that in my memory bank. But the following year I was on holiday in the States, and I happened to be in Dealey Plaza, pacing out the sight lines in 1964, the year after. I ended up having my hair cut by Jack Ruby's barber, which is quite amazing.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
And I said to this guy, I said, so what do the people of Dallas think about the assassination of JFK? He said, I remember to this day, he said, everyone in Dallas knows there were multiple shooters. Right. Now, it's supposedly Lee Harvey Oswald was the sole gunman, and he's up in the book depository, and I walked into the book depository and had a look around there, and he's looking down at Kennedy with, I forget the name of the rifle, but it's a sort of bolt action, very slow to load thing, and he's supposed to have fired off 1 or 2 or 3 shots, and on the Zapruder camera, you can see at least 2 shots that move Kennedy's body forward. The third shot, his head jerks backwards, and the back of his skull is blown off, and it's the so-called Harper fragment, which is 6 square inches, and the Harper fragment is found the following day on the grass in Dealey Plaza by a man called Billy Harper, and it's handed in as evidence. But I'm saying, talking about truth testing of whatever we get on news from the crime scene, if JFK's head is blown backwards, the bullet comes from the front.
Yes.
Right? Simple laws of physics. So whatever the government or the third party or the media say or attempt to say, that he was shot by Lee Harvey Oswald from behind is false because it can't explain JFK's head being blown backwards. So there is another shooter.
Yeah, and this magic holy theory is crap. Go right in.
Right. Now, James E. Files is a man who was put into jail, I think in the 1970s or something, for murder, and he's just been released and he's in Chicago. And if ever, Bishop, you think you could put together an interview with James E. Files and you'd like to invite me or Field McConnell or whatever, I'd love to go with you to Chicago and meet the folks in Chicago. And if this guy would be willing to give an interview, then he has an extraordinary story to tell you. Because what he says is he was hired to take out Kennedy, and he set up his operation on the grassy knoll on the parapet there, and he was armed with an XP-100 Remington rifle called, I think they call it a Fireball rifle, with a Redfield scope on it, which is gives an extraordinary, well-balanced gun, perfect for assassination, right? He says he aimed at Kennedy's right eye, and at the moment he squeezed the trigger, someone, perhaps from a hotel, and I can't remember the hotel, because he said there were 3 sniper teams, but he doesn't know the identity of the other teams. Right? He was just one of them. All he knew was there were other sniper teams because they wanted to make sure that they got Kennedy. Right?
Yeah.
And as he squeezed the trigger, a bullet from behind Kennedy pushed his head forward, so he hit Kennedy behind the right temple and blew the back of his head off. The bullet he used was filled with mercury to get the heavy density and blow the guy's, blow JFK's, basically nearly blew his head off, right? Then he bit the shell, all right, and he left the shell standing on the parapet. And then he put his gun away in the thing, and he walked away, and he escaped, etc., etc. He said he had been driving around with Lee Harvey Oswald, calibrating this gun. In 1981, a father and son team were doing metal detection, and they found a bullet shell. That's an amazing story. This is what I think forensic economics is about. You're looking at the facts of the case, you know, the acts rea, to determine before you put the mens rea together, you've got to have the facts. Now, is he telling the truth or is he not? Where is the casing? It's been handed in evidence, but apparently it's got his teeth marks in it that match his teeth.
Perfect match.
Right. Now, is that true or not? The point is, it's a 40-minute video. It's absolutely compelling. This guy was a really nasty guy. He was an enforcer, and one way he'd get people to pay up is put their head in a vice and tighten up their vice. Right? So he's a really, really nasty guy. But that's what you're dealing with.
You know what? And he was. Is he still in prison or he's out of prison?
No,
right?
He's out. He's been released. He served his time, and he's in Chicago.
Well, I would love to get a hold of him or his people. You know what? You're giving me a great idea, David. I'm going to do that, God willing, to get him on the air. And God willing, when I get him on the air, I'm going to call you. That would be the interview of the century here at GSRR. Oh, my God. 929-477-3997. If you live outside of the continental United States of America, you can call us in right now at 1-929-477-3997. We have with us Mr. David HAWKINS, a world-renowned global forensic economist, here and only here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio. The Serco connections to the assassinations of John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and Hurricane Katrina. Martin Luther King, I'm going to say this, and you just take over from here, David, that it seems like the more that one digs into this rabbit hole, the uglier that it gets. That there was a billionaire, a man from Texas by the name of J.L. Hunt. I'm sure you've heard of him.
Yes.
That he might have been involved in the JFK assassination. But there is a former minister. Again, I can't verify this, but there's a former minister in the Nation of Islam that had said specifically that J.L. Hunt had given Elijah Muhammad, the leader of the Nation of Islam, all right, the late Elijah Muhammad, $100,000 a year to this black organization. Malcolm X found out about that, not just about J.L. Hunt giving and subsidizing the Nation of Islam with $100,000 a year. And mind you, I'm thinking, why would Elijah Muhammad, who is supposed to be pro-black, a black nationalist, but receiving money from a person who is not black? And then Malcolm X found this out, I believe, in late '63, early '64, and that's part of the reason why Malcolm X got assassinated. But I don't want to go too far ahead with Malcolm X, but with Martin Luther King, it's a very interesting story that his father, and matter of fact, that's not his real name. That Martin Luther King Jr. was not his real name. He was born Michael King, and his father was born Michael King Sr. Michael King Sr. travels to Berlin, Germany in 1934, his father. And his father had a close relationship, spiritual relationship as co-pastors, fellow clergymen in the gospel with Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Now, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, for those of you who know German theological history, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a known German communist. He was anti-fascist, anti-Hitler, anti-Nazi, but he was a German communist and socialist. And that during the early 1920s, he came to New York City, Dietrich Bonhoeffer from Germany, and was a member of a black church here called Abyssinian Baptist Church. Okay, and then he goes back to Germany, but in 1934, Martin Luther King's father, whose name was Michael King Sr., travels to Berlin, Germany. I'm thinking, why would a black man travel to Nazi Germany in 1934? And when he left Germany, 3 weeks after, his name changes from Michael King Sr. to Martin Luther King Sr., and thereby changes his son's name from Michael King Jr. to Martin Luther King Jr. And I'm going to say something. I'm going to get a lot of African Americans upset with me, but the entire civil rights movement, from 1955 to 1968 was inundated with communists, okay?
Right.
Every labor union, whether it's United Autos Workers, whether it is the Teamsters, all had communist money. And when you talked about that Phi Beta Kappa, the founder of the Southern Poverty Law Center, Morris Dees, is Phi Beta Kappa.
Really?
Morris Dees, the founder of the Southern Poverty Law Center, that started with communistic money, Phi Beta Kappa. But getting back to Martin Luther King Sr., he comes back, and I'm thinking, why would he change his name after a trip to Nazi Germany? And very few people know this, but just kind of connect the dots for us now with Martin Luther King's connection to Serco, and as we're getting deeper into this discussion.
Well, I think coming back from Germany with his name changed to Luther. Of course, Luther is the man who, what is the technical name? He put up the proclamations on the door of some cathedral, which is basically the foundation of Protestantism, or he's one of the founders of Protestantism. So maybe that was a more acceptable term to come back than like Karl Marx or some change of name, etc., etc. So they change names, of course, and they choose these names very carefully to fit into some preconception that basically decoys people into a red herring. So the common element you see when I believe you have these high-profile assassinations is to look to see whether or not there's evidence for Serco going into the United States Patent and Trademark Office and putting together a group of patents and paying the patentees for the temporary use or the temporary right to use their patent. Let's say they don't tell the people that it's going to be used for a hit. Now, interesting enough, the James E. Files XB100 Remington Fireball was fitted with a Redfield scope, and so was the rifle allegedly used to kill Martin Luther King, a Redfield scope.
Wow, I didn't know that.
So I've just gone to the website to remind myself, because in 1962, the Redfield Company, and its official name was Redfield Gunsight Company, in 1962, it took out a patent for a variable power rifle scope with tilting reticle and erector tubes. And these were strapped onto the Remington rifle that allegedly was used to kill JFK, and the Remington rifle that was allegedly used to kill Martin Luther King. Now, what are the communication systems available to people who, let's say, are betting on the particular spot or time when JFK will die or Martin Luther King will die? So what communication systems are available for real-time interactive wagering on event outcomes? And that's the official name of the patent application taken out by Howard Lutnick, who is a bundler for Hillary Clinton, and he was the chief executive officer of Cantor Fitzgerald, who just happened to be out of the office taking his child to school, leaving his brother and 657 of his Cantor Fitzgerald colleagues to fry on 911. And there are no coincidences, Bishop. Right?
Man.
So what I believe happened is, in the case of JFK, they used the Telstar communication system. Now, James E. Files said the order to shoot Kennedy came through J. Edgar Hoover from Scotland. Now, that's interesting because I think about, now this is 1963, who in Scotland would have the kinds of resources, including expert snipers, who could put together a hit on a president of the United States and disguise the source of the order. But it turns out that the most probable candidate I can find is a man called David Sterling, who was the founder of the Long Range Desert Group in World War II, where a bunch of colonials, New Zealanders and Australians and English and so on, they went into the desert behind Rommel's front lines, and they'd cross hundreds of miles of desert in the night, and they'd come in and they'd put specially created bombs, sticky bombs, under the wings of the German planes or the Italian planes, and then they'd blow them all up and they'd disappear back into the desert. But these guys were hardened, they were tough, they were extremely competent. And I say to lots of people, when you have people like that, they're trained up, they like the adrenaline rush. What do you do when they come out of the war? They're now trained killers, right? And so they're available for hire. Now, some of them might want to flip hamburgers, but most of them want to continue with that sort of high adrenaline kind of life, and they're very good at it. Now, when they launched Telstar, it was launched in 1962, and it provided real-time communications between the United States and the French Post Office and the British Post Office. Right? That means if they decided they wanted to take out Kennedy because he was threatening to expose the secret societies that had been controlled by Britain since 1776, they needed to get some significant money into the pot and have a number of people make a great deal of money by gambling on the time of JFK's death. It's called death betting, right? In which case, they need to know precisely what time he dies. So they provide a Bell & Howell camera to Mr. Zapruder to film it, so they can see which particular frame his head gets blown off, and that frame can be clocked by the most precise clock in the world, which is the cesium fountain clock in the National Physical Laboratory in Teddington, which is accurate now in its latest form to 1 second in 186 million years.
Wow. Man. And
that's the clock that is being used for these death betting.
Oh, man. You're so gifted, David. This JFK and Martin Luther King connection, that as long as Martin Luther King, not to get away from JFK, but as long as Martin Luther King preached love and civil rights,
yes.
He wasn't a threat to the government. When he got involved in the Vietnam War and exposed in the war, Now you're getting into the money of the deep state. And then Martin Luther King had a meeting with Malcolm X. They were joining forces. Back in 1965, a week before the death of Malcolm X, he was denied entrance into France. And that's still a mystery. And so Malcolm X, I think he got assassinated. It's deeper than just him leaving the Nation of Islam or exposing Elijah Muhammad, that he had children outside of wedlock or multiple wives. Malcolm saw something, like you were talking about JFK. Malcolm saw something concerning secret societies, concerning the deep state, that they felt that he was an international threat, that he was going to turn the United States into the UN. He was poisoned in Cairo, Egypt. And then he exposed another part of Elijah Muhammad, that Elijah Muhammad was getting subsidized by J.L. Hunt, a multi-billionaire white man that was supplying $100,000 a year to the Nation of Islam. And wow, go right here. I didn't mean to cut you off, David.
No. And you see, that comes back to the Rockefeller statement. The world is ready to move to a supranational government of world bankers and an intellectual elite, and they don't care whether you're black or yellow or brown or Hindu or Christian or communist. Right? That is a sort of meta framework or platform that overrides all this stuff. So they use the Alinsky method to divide and rule, so no one can see, and that's why I think yours and mine meeting of the minds is so important, because I think, and with all the research that we've done at Able Danger, we actually have a mechanism or an instrument that we can share with your listeners and our listeners at Able Danger, where we say, look, forget about worrying about motives and so on. When you look at a crime scene, you first of all, it's not motive, opportunity, and weapon, because if you go for motive first, you're going to look for the people against whom you're prejudiced. You've got to identify the weapon. Now, back to, they used a Redfield sight attached to the gun that allegedly shot Kennedy, and a patented Redfield sight that shot Martin Luther King, and they used patented communication systems to synchronize the hit with the betting community, which was founded, and this is really stretching back into history, the first and longest established and most elite betting club in the world is White's Club in London, that was founded in 1692. Now, if you look at the betting book that survives, I think the first betting book that survived, because some was burnt in the fire of London or whatever it was, 1692 incident is 4 years after Lloyd's of London was formed, and the insurance market. So we'll come to that in a minute. But in 1814 or 1811, there's an entry in the White's Club betting book that says, in the affair of the Celeste, Lord Bloggs bets Lord Pantyhose, or whatever it was, that Captain Maxwell will die in the affair of the Celeste if any Chinaman is killed. So what I'm saying is that at least as early as 1811, if not before, Larry, they're betting on death.
Man. Oh. David, we're coming down here. We're going to get you back. I think we might get you back before the next date next month, because I'm telling you, I want us to continue this conversation, the Serco connections to the assassinations of John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King. We're going to get to Hurricane Katrina and get deep into Malcolm X and who was subsidizing the American Civil Rights Movement from 1955 to 1968. David, I'm telling you, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us tonight.
If I may I just mention abledanger.org again, because
a
lot of my research is there. So it's as in Cain and Abel, because Cain and Abel, those are the first murders, and what we think at Able Danger, and we're devoted to cloud-centric crime scene investigation, the enemy is within the gates, right? So Abel and Cain. Right, abledanger.org. Thank you very much, Bishop. It's been a privilege.
Thank you so much. Thank you. The privilege is ours. And to remember, Martin Luther King loved Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi was a part of the new socialist alternative party there in India right before his death. He was a socialist, a communist. So, again, thank you, David. And to all of our Global Spiritual Revolution partners, that was David HAWKINS of Able Danger.
Thank you very much, Bishop.
Here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio. I'm so excited tonight, and I thank God for David HAWKINS and for all of you listening to us tonight on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio. And we're excited, and we will see you next time here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio. We will be with you Thursday night for part 17 of the Acts of the Apostle Summit here and only here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio.